Okay.
Apparently, I'm being recorded.
Yes. So it tells us. Yes.
Yeah,
Okay,
the
cool.
automated voice said so, so it must be true.
All right. Okay, so Dark Bleatings, everybody. Today we have CC Adams for an author interview, who is the writer of numerous short works of horror, novellas, and one novel, I believe, if I remember that correctly, CC. So
One novel per day. Yeah.
yeah. So welcome. How's it going?
Thank you. Yes, it is good so far. Thanks for having me. It was a rainy Saturday morning, and now there is no rain from what I can see, and it's just as well I've got a barbecue after. You know me and food don't agree too well, so yeah, that's going to be terrible.
Oh no, not barbecue in the rain is even worse.
I'm business food. I'll be in my element.
Yeah. Yeah, it's still raining here. Been raining all morning. So it is Wales though, so that's pretty normal for us, I think.
Don't know what you mean.
So, if we can start with Downwind Alice, I'd like to talk about first because I'm forever complaining that there is a big lack of great werewolf
Thank you.
fiction. And I always say there's an abundance of zombies, ghosts, and
Mhm.
vampires, but werewolves and witches are a bit harder to find for adult horror. Um,
Sure. Okay.
and I really liked, I don't want to give any spoilers for this book, but it's a really, really great book that everyone should read, especially if you like werewolf fiction. And there was I felt like part of the plot of this hinges on a bit of a subversion of what we're expecting to get from the story and our central character. Um, I thought that you made some brave writing choices and told a really great story.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, can you talk a little bit about sort of your process as you were going along and working this out?
Yeah, definitely. So the first thing that comes to mind for pretty much any story I write is either what would I want to see or what do I think a good story would be. What I liked of and about it, and especially when every once in a while I retweet this, I'll say the worst thing than knowing that there's a monster is knowing that the monster's only after you.
Mm.
So that was partly the premise. The idea, and I've said this in the past before when it comes to creating the characters, that yes, there's a monster of the piece, but that's not necessarily black and white. So the same principle applies to the protagonist as well as the antagonist. So as you quite rightly say, there is an element of a subversion, if you will.
Mhm.
And I had seen one review. Let me see if I can word this correctly. An antagonist you shouldn't root for, but you do, and a protagonist that you should root for, but you don't.
Mhm.
Those are the kinds of things I wanted to weave into the mix with this particular tale.
Yeah, it was really interesting because I felt like um any horror story, I think the best villains are sort of layered grey characters rather than just all out evil.
Yeah.
So you can completely understand where the antagonist is coming from.
Mhm.
Like yes, what happens to them, it would spark quite a lot of rage, I would imagine, in
Yeah.
any reasonable person. And then I thought that that sort of dichotomy between what they're doing isn't really correct, but you can kind of understand it. And
Exactly.
I thought that you mirrored that really well in the protagonist as well, because our expectation of a protagonist is that we're automatically on side with them. Um,
Correct. Yeah.
but what the protagonist has done something terrible, but that doesn't necessarily deserve the potential consequences. So I felt very conflicted about which way I wanted it to go. So
Mm.
it was a lot of fun to read for that reason, but it has very heavy themes as well. So uh,
Yep.
yeah, I thought you created like basically a really great monster story, but one that will like stay with you for longer than something as simple as like Monster Bad human character good.
Exactly. The one of the really fun elements about writing that one in particular is there's an element of letting the genie out of the bottle,
Mm,
which is what applies to the antagonist. But you see that once the genie's let out of the bottle, there's, if you will, the restraint that you see in the beginning. Once the genie's out of the bottle, it goes downhill. There's a gravitation toward, well, yeah, this is how things should be. So
mhm,
there's a line in the narrative toward the end how wolves don't apologize for picking off sheep.
mhm.
And you see by that point how the mentality of that character has shifted from the beginning, and even what's referred to in the backstory, that sense of restraint.
Mhm.
And it's once the genie's out of the bottle, yeah, I like this. I can get used to this. I
Yeah.
don't have to apologize for this. And seeing how that impacts our protagonist
Mhm.
and the characters around them, that was the fun part to write. So by the time you have the ending, and then for me personally, when I write horror, it's not just about the fact, as it were, the fact of the horror, it's the aftermath, which
Mhm.
is why the ending is set up like that, where the protagonist is left contemplating the aftermath.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that was definitely a lot of fun to write.
Yeah, I had the same feeling when I was reading this as I got when I was watching It Follows. Like
Mhm.
that the villain's only after you kind of thing. I was like, oh my God, she is screwed. Like I was trying to like think my way out of the predicament. I was like, what would I
Yeah.
do? But yeah, when you got the idea to have a monster that is just going for one person, did you know that you wanted to do a werewolf story at that point, or
Um, the idea of the monster going for one person, as it were, was secondary, and I don't want to give too much away
Mm,
from the plot or the narrative. The idea behind at some point when the boy cried wolf, there's actually a wolf on site. That is what I wanted to play with. So the other the if you like the theme that runs in the background in terms of what the protagonist has done and what the protagonist is going to do. I I knew from the off that a lot of people would look at it and be on some, oh, that was probably most that was at the forefront of my mind when I wrote it, to be fair.
mhm.
So I didn't want to do just a werewolf story, but we want to throw something else into the mix. And it is that element of, yes, someone has cried wolf, and there's a little more to it than just someone's being attacked by a monster. That
Yeah.
would be too easy. I'm not doing that.
Yeah, it's that's the thing. There's not as much werewolf fiction, and I read a lot of zombie fiction, probably more than what's normal, even for a zombie
Mhm.
fan. And but I get bored with certain zombie stories because the setup is always zombie apocalypse and group
Sure,
of survivors, and it's I guess it's what you do with that. So I do need a little bit something extra to cling on to
sure.
because of the amount I've read now. And I find, yeah, werewolf stories they can be very straightforward, like, oh no, someone's a werewolf. Ah, but this was so that idea of there's a monster and it's only coming specifically for you again is mirrored in the protagonist if you're looking at it from the villain's perspective for the beginning of the book.
Yeah,
So yeah, there were just like a lot of great parallels between your characters here that are they've both done quite heinous things. um can't really justify what the protagonist did at all. Um, but yeah, your antagonist that was a very weird one for me because I was like I found myself rooting for the werewolf and thinking, oh no, wait, hang on, I don't think I should, but really hard not to. Um, outside of werewolves, what else do you like to write about in your short fiction?
Um, I've written a fair amount of stories which involve ghosts.
Hmm.
But if there's any particular antagonist, as it were, that I would gravitate to, it is always demons.
Demons,
Yeah, so
yeah.
you copy misery in other lines, yeah. Um, but there's a number of things about demons that have always drawn me to them.
Mhm.
And well, what was notable here is as a kid. So we're going back some years. Don't let the good grooming fool you. Yeah, but there was a film that I remember watching from childhood. I believe this is, and Ramsey, if you catch wind of this, correct me if I'm wrong. This is possibly Ramsey Campbell's favorite film, or at least one of Night of the Demon.
Hmm.
And I remember watching this film. I cannot remember for the life of me what the actual plot was about. But I know near the end of the film, there's something about a piece of paper or parchment or something. And it ends up on a railway track, and some guy's chasing after it, and it catches fire. And the next you know, there's this big ass demon, which must be a good maybe 30 feet tall or something. And it ends up picking up this guy and clawing him to death or some such. And when I had seen The Exorcist after that, it was a revelation because I always thought demons were these big ass things like
Hmm.
dinosaurs that would tower over a house. And the idea that a demon could actually fit in a person, I remember thinking, what now? It was really weird. But that's one of the things I like about demons. She, at least as we would appear to know them as a whole, that they are hidden.
Hmm.
So they're hidden. They have the supernatural, superhuman strength.
Hmm.
They have the intelligence and cunning of eons.
Hmm.
And yeah, they're violent and they're evil. So in terms of picking an antagonist, those are great things to play with. The element alone that something is hidden, and
Hmm.
let's not forget, depending on your interpretation or what particular story it is they're telepathic to a degree. They can skim the mind, they can read the mind. So the last thing you want for any villain, let alone one which is supernaturally strong and supernaturally cunning and supernaturally resilient and all the rest of it, is that they know what you're thinking.
Yeah,
They they,
yeah,
they know your deepest desires. They know your darkest fears. You don't want them to get a hold of that, but they just pick it out of thin air, like they're taking sweets out of a box.
yeah. I love demons too. The modern conception as we think of them at the I'm sure they'll
Mm.
evolve at some point in fiction, but yeah, that mind reading, super strong, apparently
Yeah,
limitless amounts of powers, like a lot of them are telekinetic as well.
yeah,
Um, and hidden, yeah, they are some of my favorites. I remember The Exorcist really scaring me, as it did most people uh
yeah.
my age when we first saw it sneakily behind our parents' backs. Sorry, mum. And and I remember I've seen it so many times that I
Mm.
thought that I wasn't overly scared by it anymore. But I watched it when I moved into my house by myself, and then
Uh-huh.
realized, oh no, I can't actually watch this if there's no one else present. It
Oh,
made, it made me feel paranoid about being alone in my house. So
yeah.
I was like, oh no, okay, no, it's still scaring me all these years later.
I tell you, ironically, in that film, one of the things that stuck with me isn't even things like the head turning or
Mm.
the projectile vomiting, but there's a scene which I believe is before the midway point. It's relatively early in, and there is I don't know who exactly is in the room. It's the adults, as it were,
Hmm.
and Reagan walks in, but she urinates on the floor.
Yeah.
And it is something about that urination that's just it's so blatant, and this is one of the things I like in any horror narrative. It's the signpost that things are going to go wrong.
Oh
Things are
yeah.
going to take a turn. Things are going downhill. You don't want to go down this rabbit hole. Those are the things I love. And it's just that defiant urination. I remember thinking, wow, where's this going?
Yeah, yeah. I think the crux of that film and why it's so effective when we get into like the later part of it and all like
Mm,
the more extreme stuff starts happening is the fact I think they spend something like 40 minutes of the film with um Reagan's mum exhausting all of the medical options first because
mhm.
she doesn't even believe in the devil or anything. And so
Yeah,
I thought like that sort of like actually showing us the process of
yeah.
Reagan being all these appointing all these doctors like, yeah, well we it must be a mental thing. And I was like, well no, the bed was lifted off the floor. I was on it. Like um I see a lot of people I maybe it's an attention span thing because apparently our attention spans are getting shorter, but younger people I say that like I'm not really old, everyone, I swear. Um but younger people complain that The Exorcist is boring and they don't even get to the scary scenes and I'm like
That's
kids
just silly.
kids today got no sense of patience and culture and storytelling.
Mm.
I'm not a huge fan of exorcism films where we go straight in with a screaming demon. I'm like, oh come on, give us some build up or something like this.
I don't think it is it's necessarily a bad thing. And again, for the record, I don't watch horror films anymore. They scare the shit out of me. But the same way that the monsters evolve, so does the narrative. It's not where you have screaming women in black and white that
Mm,
faint and collapse, and our guy is ruggedly handsome and defeats the monster. Now we see that the monsters get away, that the good people die. We see that good people become bad, for want of a better way of putting it. So to start with something horrific from a narrative point of view isn't necessarily a bad thing. Because
mhm,
I like the idea, if you start with something bad, as it were, if you start with something horrific, it for me, it sets the tone in terms of what happens now. So that alone is a hook.
mhm. Yeah, I guess so. I think I'm a bit grumpy about modern filmmaking. I find that I'm liking less and less as I get older, and
Mm.
I apparently I'm a nightmare to watch a film with these days because I'm so so nit. I'm like, oh well, why is the shark? Blah, 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 blah. And my mum was always like, can't you just enjoy a film? Apparently not. I don't know what's happened. If we could go back to yes, so villains. What
Mm.
what is it? So obviously demons, ghosts, and things, but on a sort of like emotional or thematic level, what kind of stuff do you find that you tend to write most often?
Um, that's a good question. What kind of stuff do I write on an emotional level? Uh,
Not to put you on the spot, Cece.
no, not at all. Ask away. I'm really not sure that there is anything in particular that I gravitate to.
Mhm.
I mean, for example, with forfeit tissue, which is the first one that comes to mind, we have a character who has survived a traumatic event where a lot of people have died. And as such, there's an entity that comes after our protagonist, believing him to be guilty, as in,
Mhm.
all these people have died and you've lived. Now, the protagonist is innocent, but that's not the point. The
Mhm.
entity's still coming after him. So it's not just dealing with the horror of being pursued by something supernatural, otherworldly. It's the fact that something has found you guilty and you are not.
Mhm.
That is disturbing, especially since the entity has that power, that resilience, if you like, that single-minded purpose. I'm going to punish you.
Mhm.
You then have a novella like But Worse Will Come, which out of all the stuff I've written is a personal favorite, where it's this the setup of predator and prey.
Mhm.
So, despite the fact that our protagonist was a bully in childhood, and one particular act of bullying has ultimately set this chain of events in motion, the antagonist that is coming after him, it doesn't really care that he was something of an ass as a child. It's, well, as far as I'm concerned, you're prey and I'm coming for you.
Mhm.
And I think even at some point in the book, it mentions you think I'm evil because I want to eat. No, I just want to eat. So it's I can't really say off the top of my head that there's any, if you like, motivation or setup for the protagonist that I would gravitate to.
Mhm.
There are certain villains, for want of a better way of putting it, that I might gravitate to, but I don't think necessarily there's anything for the protagonist.
Mhm.
And certainly for the closure novel, I like the idea of the road to hell is paved with good intentions.
Mhm.
So despite the fact that they've had a near-death experience, and as I would imagine, thankfully I've not had a near-death experience yet, that when you have such an experience, you might reevaluate how you see things, how you do things, how you
Mhm.
approach things. And they decide to help people.
Mhm.
And that's when shit goes to hell in a handbasket because you're so blinded by the idea of helping people, you're not seeing the harm that you're doing until other people are telling you you're doing some harm. So again, there's a number of things that I would play within a narrative in terms of what motivation the protagonist has and where it takes them,
Mhm.
even what kind of character the protagonist is.
Mhm. Yeah,
Some of them are assholes and some of them are benevolent. And for at least one, which is one of the next projects, we have someone who is ultimately a wanker in these days of post Me Too. This is not a guy you want to meet, but unfortunately, he, like so many characters in the horror narrative, unwittingly lets a genie out of the box. And this
Mhm.
is a genie you don't want to meet.
Mhm. Yeah, I think something that I've picked up on in your writing is that um generally speaking, you do play with the question of guilt and blame. Like it's not normally like really straightforward if someone is
Mhm.
blameless or or if they are guilty. And then a bit below that, also sort of just cause and consequence. So like
Yeah,
yeah,
definitely that.
yeah, so yeah, sometimes in like you say, like intention doesn't o always equal outcome.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, I've seen you sort of play with that on a variety of scales. So yeah, it's a very human concept because I think everyone has at least said something wrong that they thought was okay when they
Mhm.
said it, or they've
Yeah.
hurt someone's feelings and not even been aware because they didn't mean
Mhm.
to hurt the like so it's yeah, and I think that for anyone who's ever sort of like for whatever reason told a lie,
Mhm.
and it coming back on you later, I tried to think of have I tried to think of an example where I've told a lie that's come back on me, but I can't. I'm a terrible liar, so I don't.
Remember, this is being recorded, so
Yeah, no,
yeah, yeah.
I think I'm okay because I'm a bad liar, so I just don't. So I just start smirking if I'm trying to get away with something, but I don't normally have anything devious going on, or do I? Maybe that's just the impression I've created. Um, evil plan is to interview all of the authors I can in the world and just sort of subconsciously lift all of your ideas to create the ultimate horror novel. That's where I've been. It's
You,
my
you,
supervillain plan.
you're welcome to lift and interpret and mold and try as you see fit. It's interesting that you mentioned the guilt though,
Mhm.
because you're not the only person who's read some of my work and said that.
Mhm.
The the thing about the actions and consequence, I can willingly cop to that. Yeah, I can see that in my work. But not only in terms of a character having feelings of guilt, but also in some way that they are guilty.
Hmm.
And I never thought of it like that, but hearing someone else say this now, I'm thinking, well, yeah, maybe that has found its way into a number of works that I've written, which might
Well,
see
but
together.
it's interesting how you use it though, because feeling guilty doesn't actually mean you are guilty, as you said
True.
for your one work. So, and guilt can be such a destructive emotion. Nobody wants to feel guilty. It's one of the worst. It's one of the
Mm,
worst emotions for me. If ever I know I've like upset someone or like it plays like I'm the kind of person that like I'll be dropping off to sleep and then my mind will go, hey, remember that shitty thing you said to Anna when you were 5? And I'm like, oh god damn it, why am I still like worrying about that? But it's an emotion that isn't as easy to shift. It's not like a fleeting emotion then.
true.
Like
Very true.
you can have a moment of rage and then that can dissipate and you can think, oh well, I don't know why I got so angry, but guilt will like dig
That's a
into
good
you.
point. Yeah. There's
So
definitely, actually, I've never thought of it like that, but definitely a good point.
it's the way that you use it. So I like how you it's sort of like you'll embed it in a character and it's like the thing that you think about as a reader is like how guilty should they feel?
Mhm.
Should they be feeling worse or should they not be feeling bad about this at all? So yeah, it's just a sort of a universal human emotion that you've uh given yeah, you use it with a lot of depth. That is what I'm saying. It's a good device for storytelling, definitely. Do you have any sort of like themes or topics that you entirely stay away from on purpose or
Um, Another very good question. Certainly having read Downwind Alice, you have an idea of where stories might go. Uh, in terms of anything that I would, if you like, actively stay away from in terms of themes,
Mhm.
no, I don't think so. The, I mean, probably the most far-reaching, as it were, probably the most far-reaching novella that I'd written was the Seaman novella, which yeah, it wasn't well received by everyone. I had someone unfriend me in the real world about it, and it's not to throw shade, but to be fair, I believe that as far as this particular person is concerned, when it came to dating and her interactions with men, I think in a very real sense, she left herself wide open. No, no pun intended. But I can understand where it didn't sit right with her. But ironically, I remember for a journal entry I did after the unfriending, that got a lot of attention, as in, yes, I write horror. It's not for everyone. Here's your disclaimer. And I think a lot of people were intrigued by the novella as a result. So I'm sorry, wherever you are, said friend who unfriended me, your scheme backfired on you. I'm very sorry.
Um
But yeah,
yeah.
nothing in particular, I think, that has really been off limits. I think if it's a true story, as in I feel this would be interesting, and I don't want to write something just to shock people or gross people out. I do want to tell a good story.
Mhm.
Again, it got some flack, but there's no lie in what I do. I stand by
Yeah,
the
I
word.
well, I think s- some people I find this with people who don't typically read horror. There's a an
Mm.
assumption sometimes that horror authors are like on board with everything they write. Like morally, like their morals align with like the hideous things they're coming out with. And I'm like, well, you got to look a little bit deeper than that because
Yeah,
usually,
definitely.
that's I very rarely read a book where it colors my view of the author. in a bad
Mhm.
way, because it's, you know, every now and then I've read something where I can kind of feel how the author feels about, you know, a certain thing, and if it doesn't align with how I feel about something, then maybe I just think, oh, that author might not be for me. But yeah, it is not the case that horror writers are just sort of like penning their wildest fantasies or
Mhm.
crazy stuff like that. And controversy sells sometimes. I've seen I've seen, especially in extreme horror, I've seen books take off because of angry reviews saying
Mhm.
this is the most despicable book I've ever read, and the next thing you know, the author's like, well, thanks guys, I've actually made money. So um yeah, okay. I wonder where the line for you would be. I guess maybe you'll discover it as you're going along. Maybe you'll start writing something one day and think, oh wait, no, don't want to.
The I suppose if there is anything that resembles a line or is close to a line, it's going to maybe I say maybe around issues of race, and I say that from the point of view of as much as I love London and I love the diversity and all the rest of it. Not everyone in the city is as accommodating as I. Not everyone in our industry in the genre community is as accommodating as I am, and I've seen nuances from when I've been at conventions and such, which make me think, wow. Now I could get into this in the room and there's witnesses and everything, but don't want to do that. Don't
Mhm,
need to do that. The time may come where, and I've written this in a journal entry in the past. It was something to the effect of, and to quote Keith Murray, "Ooh, I might lose my cool. I might get to that moment." For the
mhm,
record, I don't readily block or unfriend people. There've been a couple of instances, but it's always on the quiet before I announce to the wider audience, they've been a dick, you've been a dick, and this is the line in the sand.
mhm,
But in terms of race and people's degree of racial bias or discrimination, and I see you hold up a copy of Misery and Other Lines, which is actually what reminded me. So for that kind of book, you have a range of characters in there, but not everyone is so accommodating of their fellow man. You have at least one bigot
mhm,
who, when he's presented with a gay couple, he insults them, and one of the partner of the protagonist in that particular tale, he slams his head into the side of a bus, which that alone was great fun to write. Now, I'm aware that some people aren't so confrontational,
mhm,
but to capture the city realistically, as much as I don't like those kinds of people, I would be doing it a disservice if I didn't capture those kinds of people.
mhm.
So, in that sense, I don't think there's anything really off limits for what I write, but it's to make sure that I get an accurate representation.
Yeah, I feel like your characters are very honest, emotionally honest. I was I was actually slightly concerned initially that people were gonna come at you for an element of this. Only because we were sort of still in the Me Too movement, and I thought, oh, someone is gonna take exception to an element of this. But I feel like the I mean, this kind of stuff happens. I mean, not necessarily the werewolf, but um,
Yeah.
you know, I know someone, unfortunately, not a friend of mine anymore, that did
Mm,
something similar to what the protagonist did here. So like this is a very real issue.
yeah,
And yeah, I feel like yeah, your characters always do feel like real people, and not everyone makes good decisions, and not everyone has a very nice thought process about certain things either. So yeah,
correct.
I do think you capture that. Right, go on.
Yes. So, the bone I have to pick with you is I gave you a long ass list of werewolf tales, and
Mhm.
I'm going to go out on a limb and say that you've not read a whole lot of them, if any.
I have bought things on that list.
Okay, good. That's a start.
And I have a small pile next to my new reading chair of said werewolf books. But yeah, no, I didn't read them very quickly. I'm sorry, because I was trying to get through all of my review requests. So,
All right,
and
you're
now I
forgiven.
have completed them. So I'm just onto my personal reading now. But yes, I'm starting with werewolves. I got
Which one are you on at the moment?
I got Bishop. I know that's not werewolf
I know the
specifically.
one
I have
from
Mongrels
Candace.
by
Yeah.
Stephen Graham Jones.
Hmm.
And I don't think you recommended this one, but I got Such Sharp Teeth by Rachel Harrison as well. I can't remember if
All
that was on
right.
your list or not. Um, but yeah, yeah, I'm really excited. I've just written a werewolf story that I have to redraft. So yeah. So I'm excited to get into everything you recommended because your writing is a little bit out of the box. So I've just got ahead and assumed that your reading tastes um are, good.
I don't know necessarily they're good, he said, looking at his bookshelf. But I will say that when it comes to the entertainment I consume, I'm more unforgiving and discerning than my close friends. So even when we go to the cinema,
Mhm.
if we watch a film and they will give it, say, a 7, I might give it a 4. That doesn't mean it's particularly bad. That just means it's not particularly great. It's
Yeah.
okay. It fills a couple of hours. There are very few films that I watch that make me think, oh, that's good. That's in my top 20 or top 30 of all time. It's yeah, that's not happening very often.
Yeah, the films that I like that are released today tend to be the films where everyone thinks they're boring. So I was a
Mm,
big fan of I really liked Midsummer.
okay.
And there's a film called The Black Coat's Daughter that no one seems to have heard of.
The which one?
It's called The Black Coat's Daughter. Or I
Mm.
think it was called February with the UK release, but that's one of my favorite films and no one's seen it. I can't find anyone who's seen it. But that was, yeah, quite like I kind of like the quiet slow
Mm.
burn. And then for like my past horror tastes, Alien, The Thing, American
Yep.
Werewolf in London. That's my kind of they don't make them like that anymore with physical sets and monsters at actual like robotics and things like that. It's
The practical effects.
yeah, you can't beat a practical effect. That's why Alien and Aliens has stood the test of time because they didn't CGI the aliens in. Um, as
What
well
did you
as
think that? Sorry, go
sorry,
on.
go on.
No, I was asking, what did you think of Underworld? Because when you mentioned practical effects, that's what came to mind. I
Um,
know there's an element of CGI involved,
mm,
but how the changed lichens look down to their physiology and the dog leg, as it were.
mhm.
They're actors in suits, but on like mini stilts. That's
Yeah,
how they achieve that look.
I liked Underworld and I watched it. I watched the first one again last year because it had been a long
Mhm.
time since I'd seen it, and
Yeah.
I was rewatching films that I liked when I was like 20-ish, 20 to 25, because I was wondering how cool I would find those films now. So I watched
Mm.
Underworld, um, Queen of the Damned, um, and something else I can't remember now. But I still rate Underworld. I thought that was pretty good, and I liked the effects. And
Yeah, agreed.
I think when it came out, it very much appealed to my. I was in my goth era then, and also I just love Kate Beckinsale, so you just can't go wrong. Oh, Van Helsing was the other one I watched. Now that one I am not as impressed by anymore. So
In terms of what may be called a popcorn film, I like it. I wouldn't go out of my way to watch it, but in the event that it's on terrestrial TV or it's on cable and I'm in the room and I'm eating, I think, yeah, fuck it, I'll sit down and watch the remainder.
Yeah.
Underworld is I like Underworld. It's not necessarily a film that would be an all-time great for me, but
Mhm.
the the story, the general aesthetic of the film, like the darker palette, as it were,
Yeah.
and the scene where, especially toward near the end, where Lucian's already been killed. If he's not dead, he's near enough dead.
Mhm.
And one of the vampires is tagged by rays, and it's the vampire with the silver whips. I
Mhm.
just love that scene. The
Yeah.
way he gets lashed in his cheek, and there's a line of blood in the water. Though
Yeah.
those are the things that, from a narrative point of view, I mean, we know, right, fine, you've got two pieces of string, you've got a werewolf in front of you. We know who's going to win, but the narrative throughout the scene and how it's set up is just beautiful. It's
Yeah.
great.
I think it's a decent action horror, supernatural action horror film. I'll tell
Definitely.
you what the reigning champion is for me though, and I rewatched this with my brother, think because my
Mm.
brother had never seen it. It was before his time. Um, and I was like, oh my God, this film is still great. It's Blade. I'm never going to not love Blade. I I thought because I think that came out in 1998, and I thought surely this will not have aged well. And the bits of CGI haven't aged well, but
Mm.
everything else, I was like, oh no, this is. And I said to my brother, I was like, do I just think that this is really cool because it came out when I was at like the right age for it? And he was like, oh no, that was really cool. It's like, oh good.
And it's interesting you mention that because only only today, this morning, I was busy watching if you like, the final gang fight, as it were, from the end of the film, where after I forget the vampire's name, but the one who has taken Blaze shades and he comes at him, and Blaze got the silver
Oh
wire in his
yeah,
back, he decapitates him.
yeah.
I remember now when I went to see the film when it came out. But I had to go at something like an 11 o'clock showing or some such because the 6 o'clock showing was fully booked. The
Hmm.
8 o'clock showing was fully booked. So that's the earliest showing I could go and see. And especially in the wake of, I think it was Eddie Murphy's Vampire in Brooklyn.
Oh my
So,
God, I love that film.
so when you have that kind of vampire film with a black man in the lead role,
Yeah,
and then you have Blade, I
yeah.
remember the fuss, but that scene after our vampire gets decapitated with the wire
Mm.
and the hand goes up and it catches the shades and he puts them on, the camera pans around him. I just remember the whole cinema just broke out in cheers. And for something
Yeah.
which is, as you quite rightly mentioned, is a kind of action horror film, that change in the narrative, everyone's just cheering, the whistling, the stamping. You just know there's a major ask coming.
It's because it's the way when he catches the glasses, the song kicks in.
Yep,
Well, Struck by Lightning. I bought the soundtrack. I still have
yep.
the CD somewhere. And oh my God, yeah. And I remember that that film was so huge. I remember the remixes of the soundtrack being played if you went on
Mm,
a night out anywhere as well, and everyone knew it.
yep,
I felt like that film did everything right. Like the story was good, the
yep.
characters were good, like the villain was great, and then you had like very one of the very few films of any genre where you just have a platonic male female relationship
Yes,
that doesn't feel like it
yes.
needs to be anything else. Um, yeah, yeah, that's such a great film. I'm gonna have to rewatch it, and I feel like watching Blade again now. But yeah, yeah, I love that film. But yeah, that's one of the few from like my I say like my teen years that's like as excellent as I remember, and I was so relieved because you know when you watch a film, a beloved
Mm.
film from your past, and then on the rewatch you're like, oh, I actually don't think this is good. It was a disappointing time. So
It-
did you have any for your let's go back to your childhood. Did you have any sort of like films that you deemed scary that sort of influenced you, do you think, like for your horror tastes?
Um, I mean, again, I don't. watch horror films anymore because they genuinely scare the shit out of me. I find them unpleasantly disturbing. But in terms of what influenced my horror tastes, I always have to cite The Thing
Yeah.
as my all-time favorite film in any genre. John Carpenter's The Thing. So I have this thing, again, no pun intended, in the stories I write, where I approach them with more of a cinematic sensibility, which I've gotten from The Thing.
Hmm.
So you have scenes in The Thing where once Macready and Copper have gone off to the Norwegian camp, and you see the camera panning around the American camp before it finally shows one scene and a dog walks through it and goes into
Hmm.
somebody's room. The other scene of note in particular in The Thing is after they discover Blair's ship. And Knowles asks, where was he trying to go? And Macready says, anywhere but here.
Hmm.
And the camera pans around the camp. So there are elements in my work that people will recognize where it's got that sensibility of cinematography where I will guide you through a scene and show you as you go through the day how the shadows start to lengthen and they grow bold and cast the room into darkness, and even focusing on taps or whatever. I say this because I think that's what I did for There Goes Pretty. So it's the element of panning around the environment, and the environment is just as much a character as the human and non-human characters that move through a scene and move through the narrative.
Hmm.
So The Thing has definitely given me, if you like, the appreciation for a cinematographer, an element of fuck it, an element of cinematography in a scene. Um, the the remake of The Fly is going to be notable here because
Ooh.
while I've never watched that film from start to finish, I remember the furthest I could go watching that film was pretty much until he has discovered what went wrong, and Ronnie goes back to see him, and he is walking with canes, and
Mm.
his skin looks worse, and he can't eat without vomiting on his food first, and his ear falls off. I watched about up to that scene. I had the misfortune to walk in on my brother and his then girlfriend at some point. I didn't realize this is what they were doing, but they were watching the film in the dark, and they got into near the end of the film where, and I only know this because I've read the narrative once or twice, where she's already ripped his jaw off and he goes through the penultimate transformation, as it were. And the scene I walked in on with the two of them sat there side by side on the sofa watching the film in the dark was where his eyes have slopped out of his head and he's tearing himself out the human skin. And I remember stood there as I'd walked in, like, and if I hadn't had the presence of mind to run from the room, I would have passed out in fear. A very unpleasant feeling. But
Mhm.
that that sensibility of, oh no, and just something horrific and supernatural, otherworldly, and other adjectives that you want to throw at it. So when people read my work and say that I've made their skin crawl, or
Mhm.
one of my favorite comments today is, and I quote, "Some of you motherfuckers need Jesus." For the record, that story's not published yet, but it does involve cannibalism. To have that kind of reaction on a reader is what I'm aiming for.
Mhm.
So yeah, I definitely want to tell a good story, but make no mistake, when I tell these stories, my aim is to scare the shit out of you.
Mhm. Well, I think you for me as a reader, what makes a great book is if I can remember how I felt reading it, like later on. So because I read so many books and I enjoy almost I mean I yeah, especially with like review requests, I get a lot of review requests, so I'm
Of
always
course.
reading. And I always think, oh, I'll definitely remember this book, but I have learned now to make extensive notes when I'm reading, because if I don't get to writing the review for a while, if I haven't done that, then
Yeah.
I'm in trouble. And
Mhm.
I guess there's only so much room in your brain to just automatically remember the ins and outs of every story you read.
Sure.
So what I've started measuring how effective a book was is do I, if I can't remember the story much, do I still remember
Mhm.
like my feelings, if that
Yeah.
makes sense. And then the extra great ones I also could still write a detailed like summary. um I read I read this years ago now. I feel like I could write a fairly detailed summary. Um, I just remember feeling uncomfortable and unnerved and quite freaked out while I was reading it. And yeah, and I do remember the ins and outs of like I can't do like a bigger vouch for the book than that, guys. That I also remember in quite fine detail the plot and the characters and certain scenes as well. Um, so yeah, there are a few books like that. Go on.
So I have a question on this because you've held up that book a number of times.
Yeah,
If you had to pick a favorite scene from the book,
yeah,
or at least one,
yeah.
what would it?
I think it's a wine cellar. Um,
Oh, that yes.
yeah. I couldn't remember.
Okay.
I'm sure because I remember wine. But yeah, it's the wine cellar. That's the one. That, like, my I remember what I pictured as I was reading it. So
Mm.
if I when I think about this book, that's straight where my mind goes is to that
All
scene.
right.
Um,
Okay.
I do quite with a you make it easy to vividly picture because, like you said, there is a cinematic element to your writing. Um, there's a few, not that many authors have that power, CC, just so you know, because I do have, I feel like Tim Leben does that for me. Um, Adam Neville does that. And
Mhm.
yeah, recently Rachel Harrison and oh, there's about actually there's more than I thought, but still a small number comparatively. But yeah, I can remember like I felt also tense when he turns up at her home as well. Or is she at her home or is she staying with someone? I can't remember exactly, but I just know there's a moment where he turns up and she sees him for the first time, and realizes that he's about, and that made me really uncomfortable. So, yeah, I had it's so funny, isn't it? Because in real life, I don't want to feel anxious. It's just the
Mm.
worst. But when I'm reading, if I can read something that incites um like anxiety in me, I'm like, oh, this is a good book.
The irony is that for all the subterfuge, if you will, and definitely the violence and carnage that's in the book, the the one scene in particular that sticks with me is actually the ending. It comes back to what I said earlier.
Oh, yeah.
The horror is one thing. The actual act of the horror is one thing, but what what really sticks with me, and for me it's like having yin without yang, is the aftermath. So for me, right in the scene of the aftermath, and it sets up what is possibly going to happen, what is likely to happen.
Hmm.
Which ironically, that wasn't how the previous draft was.
Oh,
But it was
interesting.
only after going back to it, and it's like an egg that keeps hatching out of itself. It's an embryo that keeps hatching out of itself. And when I revisited the previous draft, and I thought, no, that's not it. We want to get more into the please no, please God no. So yeah, that was a joy. That's still my favorite, probably my favorite element in the whole book, the
Hmm.
ending.
Yeah, yeah, the final scenes were really chilling. It's I got like a oh like when you were talking then because yeah, that memory flooded back to me then. I pictured there's a train station I used to frequent when I was worked in Cardiff, and that's where I put
Okay.
Yeah, that's where I put myself when I was reading towards the end. So I was like, oh God. Um, what kind of stuff do you like to read? Like what are your do you I know you don't watch much horror. I'm
Mm.
assuming you read more horror than you watch. Or do
Oh,
you?
oh, absolutely. Trying to think. The last horror I read was Wayne Smith's Thor again,
Mhm,
which is still my. I don't know necessarily it's my favorite werewolf book, but it's definitely one of my favorite horror novels.
mhm,
Uh, which is on the list of what I think it was top of the list I recommended to you. A
mhm.
werewolf story, but told from the point of view of Thor, who's the family dog, which is yeah, it's violent, it's intrigue, and I can appreciate animals. I wouldn't say I'm a dog lover. Both of my neighbors have dogs, I think, if not that house, the house next to it. But I have no shame in saying that I got misty-eyed by the end of the novel. It's that kind of narrative. Um, so yeah, I'll read stories where it's I don't want to say quiet horror.
Mhm.
It's those are terms I don't really like, to be honest. It's horror, whether it's with a werewolf, whether it's a vampire, whether it's a zombie, whether it's a ghost. Um, I mean, aside from horror, I will read some humor. I've read some Christopher Moore. I've got one of my Canadian friends who I love to bits who's recommended some Christopher Moore. Uh, the kind of stuff that when I've read it, I burst out laughing while reading it on the train, that kind of stuff.
Mhm.
Um, the I'd always been a Michael Crichton fan, and
Yeah.
certainly in terms of how I would not only construct a narrative, but that weaving of fact into fiction to produce something that the reader can really buy into. And wow, this is real. And then no, it's not real. I'm just woven the two together. So books like Jurassic Park, definitely.
Yeah.
Timeline is one of his better books as well. Prey is also brilliant. So yeah, long been a Crichton fan, and given that he had died some years ago, I don't think he's going to write anymore. But I've got a lot of Crichton.
You don't
I've
think
got a
he's
lot
gonna
of
write
Joe
anymore?
Nesbo as well. Yeah, I'm sure as hell hope not. But Joe Nesbo's crime books around Harry, I think it's pronounced Hurley, but it's spelled Hole, Hole.
Hmm.
The Norwegian inspector who is a brilliant detective.
Hmm.
So the film The Snowman, which was released some time ago with Michael Fassbender in the lead role, that's
Oh
based
yeah.
on a Joe Nesbo book.
Hmm.
So because we mentioned it, I'm gonna put out a handful of these. Yeah, look, I'm gonna do this shit. Big ass doorstops, but they're very good fun.
Oh cool. Yeah.
But yeah, I love that man's work. I read the first 10. I think there might be two released since then, but I bought one of them, but I've not got around to reading it,
Hmm.
especially since it's a bigger book. So yeah, I
Do
don't
you
do well with it.
is there anyone in particular I like I and when I ask these questions, I want
Mm.
everyone to bear in mind that because we're all part of the indie horror community, people's minds go blank on this because we all know each other.
Yeah.
Um, but is there anyone that at the moment you think is sort of making waves in indie horror?
Um, I see. I don't read a whole lot of fiction in general, partly because I'm busy with a lot of writing and
Yeah.
other bits and pieces. So I don't necessarily get to read a whole lot, let alone the stuff from my peers. In terms of
There are
who
lots of us.
is, yeah, and to see the likes of lists on Goodreads or social media or whatever, where someone has mentioned how many books they've read in a year, and I just
Mhm,
think, how? I mean, yeah, different people do different things differently,
mhm,
but for me, there's always that element of how is that pot? Who are you? You can do it. Wow, you have an S on the chest. But in terms of story and narrative, the last one I read that stuck with me was Narcissus, which I think is by Adam Godfrey. I
Mhm.
think that's the surname. And Adam, if I've got this wrong, apologies, but read Narcissus, which I thought was brilliant. Um, I know this, he'd written this a little while ago, and every time I see him, we meet up for drinks, we meet up for food. There was always an element of dick sucking involved. Where this goes to Eric Hofstadter, who'd written Rare Breeds,
Mhm.
which is, I know so many of us write horror, and horrific things happen as a result of that horror narrative to those characters. But Rare Breeds for me is one of those standout works. Doesn't matter whether it's a short story or novella or horror. What he has captured in there is not just something horrific. It's the element in the horror story of things have gone horribly wrong.
Mhm.
And that had blown me away the first time I'd read it. It still sticks with me those occasions I go back and read it.
Mhm.
In terms of who is, if you will, doing the rounds, not necessarily because I've read their work, but in terms of their how they approach their craft in the genre.
Mhm.
Um, you mentioned Tim Levin, so I go give it up to
Mhm.
Tim because Tim is, from what I see, he's consistent. He goes to conventions. His work, as far as I've seen, lands well with the audience, lands well with his peers. Um, V Castro is another one. That woman is relentless. So again, I give her a props.
Mhm.
The um the Alien Vasquez book I'd read, it wasn't what I was expecting. I was pleasantly surprised by it though. So
Mhm.
yeah, she's relentless.
Yeah.
And especially in a community as big as ours, I'm aware that every so often someone is published in some publication. They've had a short story published, they have a novella coming out, they have an upcoming novel.
Mhm.
And everyone has something to shout about, so they shout loud.
Mhm.
But for me personally, and the other people I see in the genre of note, is those who don't shout loud, but they shout often, as in, I have this novel coming out.
Mhm.
I'm at this convention. I'm doing this interview.
Mhm.
I'm working on this project. And those are those people, the ones that I've mentioned, that I know that they are consistent. They're forever putting in work, and it shows in their engagement. And those are those are the people that when I think of who's who in the genre, they're the first ones to mind for those reasons.
Mhm. Yeah, there's I always get stumped if someone's like, "Oh, can you recommend some good indie horror?" I'm like, "Yeah, but how long have you got?"
Mm,
And because but thankfully because of the UK convention circuit for indie horror for horror, I got to meet a lot of the writers that I read, and I've just made so many friends that way, and for that reason I
mm,
permanently got a never ending to be read list as well, because I want to read everything all my friends are writing. And it's I do think like the quality of the horror that I read in the indie spaces is pretty, I mean, it's pretty high. A lot, like I think about like Dave Jeffries A Quiet
yep.
Apocalypse series. He's a it's yeah, there's a lot of gold to be mined in horror fiction. We're at in the mainstream or in indie or in the mid presses,
Definitely.
whatever. Um do you have something that you're working on right now, or something that you're releasing that you can tell us about?
Um, there's always something I'm working on.
Yeah.
That's the short answer. The not so short answer is I have two books I am currently working on. I
Mhm.
got I got beta read edits back on the previous one
Mhm.
from two of my trusted beta readers. One is one of my Canadian friends. Love her to bits. She when she read this particular work, incidentally, she didn't like it at all. She don't like it. But given the kind of person she is, she always feels awkward telling me that she's not liked a particular work. I said, no,
Hmm.
no, no, you're still one of my closest friends. I still love you to bits, all this good. She goes, I know, I feel awkward. And I just, really, really, woman. But on the other hand, Kit Power read
Oh,
the he read the same draft and he loves it. So when it comes to beta readers, I have a trusted team of which Kit is one of them. My friend Terry, that's her name. Terry, yep, still love you to bits. She's the other one. So two books I'm working on. I'm currently, now that I've got beta reads back on that book, I'm doing a deeper dive of edits on the other book. What else do I have coming down the pipe? I sold a story a number of years ago to a particular publication, which has yet to be published because they would only publish every quarter or such.
mhm.
And said publisher had actually bought a raft of stories from the off. So while I've already been paid for it and contract signed and all the rest of it, it's not been released yet. But in much the same way as the But Worse Will Come mythos. This is set in West, or rather, it refers to West Norwood Cemetery, but it's not in that mythos. So it'll be nice to see that finally in print. Um, I had a couple of invites to write for upcoming publications. One is done. The other one I need to work on after I have done round of edits on this book, and also a novella that I need to overhaul. So when I said that post Me Too, this is a character that is going to rub a lot of people, I imagine, the wrong way. Not just women, but men as well, because they are so misogynistic.
Mhm.
But they let a genie out of the bottle, which, whether you're misogynistic or not, no one wants to see something so terrifying that it has such a profound effect on those that witness it.
Oh,
And exactly. So
I'm intrigued.
it's much the same way that I want to construct something which I feel is supernatural. But that being said, it sits realistically in the modern world.
Hmm.
This is the approach that I taken, and this is one of the projects which will be coming next.
Hmm.
So that one I'm looking forward to writing. It's not just every monster has big sharp teeth. It's no, we're not doing that. We want something which is very 3D and it's very realistic and there are nuances. It feels like a believable character. The fact that it's not human isn't the point. You want them to feel realistic. You want them to have a realistic motivation, even if it's a non-human motivation. You want it to feel realistic so that when the human characters are presented with it, they're thinking, he's anything but that.
Yeah.
Can't we just go away from here? You want to give them a reason to fear it beyond the it just looks hideous or it looks wrong.
Hmm.
So yes, long story short, there are a number of projects in the works. Um, as for when they would drop, I would say autumn at the earliest would
Hmm.
be my guess,
Cool.
but
So
that
watch
depends on
this
a number of
space.
things. Yeah,
Cool.
definitely.
I have.
I'm mindful to keep
Sorry, go on.
the output up though, because the idea behind engagement for me, this comes back to what I said earlier,
Hmm.
where I can appreciate that people have their releases, so they will shout it from the mountaintops. I have this release, I'm in this book, I'm with this person, it's from this press, all the rest of it.
Hmm.
I get that. I appreciate that, I accept that, I can agree with that. But I'm mindful to not only shout loud, but shout often. So I always have to be working on something. So I
Mhm.
always have something to present to the audience.
Yeah.
And given that the last release, apart from the Q&A session in Phantasmagoria, which came out the end of last month, the last release was in March. I've got some work to do. So yeah, I'll be doing some work.
Don't we all? I have a final question for you, Cece. Very
Yeah.
quickly.
Hmm.
You know what this is?
I was going to say that's one of the characters from Monsters Inc., but it's the wrong color. Or
No,
maybe it's something in the Monsters Inc. franchise.
nope. And I'll tell you when I stop recording. It's become a running thing on Happy Got Horror, as always. What
Okay.
this? If anyone in the comments knows what this is, please feel free to comment because there is a prize if you know. Um, I've asked everybody that question, CC, and no one knows. But I will key you
That's
in.
not fair. No one knows.
It's an oddity from my childhood that I'm wondering if anyone else will recognize. But I will let you in on the secret of what it is, but then you are in the inner circle and you have to keep it a secret for until
Oh,
someone
it's fine.
guesses. Okay. Well, I think we will end there on creepy one-eyed purple man, as we always do, everyone. I want to give a massive thank you, CC, for being here and answering all of my grilling questions.
Thanks for having me.
You're welcome at any time. And when you do have a new release, we maybe we can get you back and we can do a little Q&A on your next published work. That'd be fun.
Cool. Sounds
Cool.
good. Thank you.
All right. Yeah, so you just stay where you are for a sec, CC, and for everyone
Mhm.
else, we will say bye and bleed.